welcome back to the stage, Pamela Sneed.
For me, it was very different than I expected, but I want to just hear what you thought about seeing it tonight and with this audience, and why this film? Why did you choose it?
Well, basically, I really like the group experience. It's very different than viewing it at home. Even with my students, I think, I don't know, it brought out more of the humor in the film. You know, it seemed very satirical. And I chose it because I saw it, I guess, at some point during the 80s, and you know, I mean, there weren't like a plethora of women's films about lesbianism, films about woman love. So to see a film like this was actually kind of like radical and unforgettable to me, and so that's why I chose it. Yeah. And it reminded me a lot of another film that I liked, which was Entre Nous. Yeah.
Does it seem like friendships you know? I mean, you say it's satirical, but I actually, the thing I liked about it is that it was actually very sincere.
Right, right. No, but it doesn't seem like any friendships I know. I think it's like her vision. I think it's like the hope for the women's community, for the feminist movement. I mean, yeah, I think that the deep bonding goes on between women, certainly. And there is something very poignant and something very real about what happens between them, and oftentimes I think is undocumented. But I like it because it's so idealistic, also. You know, I mean, she's like, you know, sweetly singing about, like, you know, woman love and, you know, having a baby. Yeah, there's something very idealistic about it.
I have to say, watching it here, I thought about the total absence of lesbian representation in the film. From out of the feminist movement, it's pretty striking. You know, and you almost wonder what Varda was running away from in some levels.
But I actually think it was kind of radical in its representation, because I think, like, as a lesbian, you know, as a queer woman or whatever, you learn to read, you know, between the lines, you know what I mean? And, like, the lines are really, really big here. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, you know, she's dreaming of her, or she's touching her. So, in a way, I feel like she doesn't go the distance, but still that this is, like, sort of like a preface to so many other kinds of women bonding films. And then I think it's actually quite profound and quite radical for her to represent their love, you know, in that way. Even though they don't, you know, actually make love, you know. But I think, like, for the time period, I guess it was made in 1977. I think it's pioneering work, you know.
For me, it was because I was the age of the kids in the film. I realized I was like 11 or 12, and those kids in the movie were 11 or 12. So I was like, oh, it seems so 60s. So it's interesting to me to remember that the 70s were just after the 60s, because, which is probably chronologically obvious. But I think that the film seems like it's just sort of on the cusp of that kind of the hippie bus and the free love and all that kind of thing. So for me, it was actually a really successful document of '77.
Right. It was actually a great historical document. I mean, even though it was fiction, you know, the history in it was amazing.
And do you have any questions?
Thanks for the mic. I guess so. I need a minute to formulate a question, but maybe we could take a question from the audience. Does anybody have any comments or questions?
Yeah.
Sure.
I really like the dichotomy of two different their trajectories, and how one had to go to work just to feed her kids and, like, live a better life and cultivate her own, like, lifestyle on her own, separate from a man. And the other was kind of like doing things on her own whim and, you know, out in the world. And I was wondering if you can talk about how you related to both women and their paths.
I think I don't think about it. I mean, yeah, Yeah, I mean, they're sort of like they're opposites in a way. I mean, I like that Apple, and I think it's really significant, you know, that she's called Apple. You know what I mean? And you know, Eve and whatever. Okay, but basically, I think more about the backdrop of the feminist movement. You know, so I less, you know, I think that their oppositeness, like. Is what brings them together and what makes them sort of like fit. But I don't think about that so much as I think about, you know, the women's movement and that being like the other trajectory, sort of like running behind those women. I'm trying to think. Yeah.
You know, I saw the movie right when it came out. I didn't remember what it was about, but I remembered that I loved it. And when I saw that it was coming, and what strikes me as it is just, to me, the point isn't whether the women have like a love scene or not. It's more, it's a whole thing that, you know, just sort of what these women dare to do, and they supported each other doing it. And even now, even though that culture isn't there, I mean, I know lots of women, you know, it's like they go through divorces and stuff, but their women friends are constant. So it's sort of, it's like, it's just totally honoring women's friendship and who's important in your life. And whether they love each other in a romantic, sexual way doesn't seem to be quite the point.
I concur.
I think also the fact that Varda was, you know, one of the only women in a group of male filmmakers who was making this film. You know, she was married to a filmmaker, Jacques Demy, who made a musical called Umbrellas of Cherbourg, and was a bisexual man, probably a gay man, and she was living this life with him. But her best friends were like Chris Marker and Robert Grier and these very austere male intellectual filmmakers, and she was making a very different kind of film. And I think the boldness of the film, I always dismissed Agnes Varda for many years because she's so kooky. Like which is another, you know, it's just really a very different voice that she was doing, and this film really made me want to see a lot more.
And I was saying that too, that I dislike most of her fiction films that I've seen, but this was the first one that I really felt like that this was dead on, like she really captured like how people behave and how people really are. I mean, I know other people really like all her fiction films, but then I was sort of thinking of it as like a kind of a feminist rock musical in a weird way, you know, that like you were saying about the musicals, that the musical numbers just kind of like were so staggeringly like kind of strange and out there for me. I mean, how did you take those numbers? Do you have a favorite number?
Really? No, really over the top, yeah. And actually they stood out to me like this time, actually the most. I think like seeing it with everyone, it was just sort of like, it was glaringly over the top, and so it just took on this whole other dimension. But it was interesting, like going back to what you were saying about the value and the importance of like women's friendships. And I was like, you know, so I was doing all this reading about the film, and basically I came across this New York Times article, and it was written not too long ago, and basically, and the guy was like, you know, I don't really like the film, and truthfully, I don't really care about women's friendships, you know, and so, you know, no, it's very honest. I mean, that's what he said in the Times, and so that, again, sort of like reaffirmed how I felt like seeing the film, and like that importance of like, there is no value placed on our friendship, on our love, on our, you know, care, yeah. Between each other, yeah.
There's a question out there. Yeah.
It's not so much a question as a comment. First of all, thank you for choosing this movie, because I'm a huge Varda fan, and apparently I'm like one of the people who was on the other side of the fence on her. And this movie, in particular, I was thinking about this in context with my favorite movie of hers, which is Le Bonheur, Happiness, which is very, trying to figure it, it's very artificial. It's sort of it's a perfect couple, and then it ends horribly. And so I'm pretty sure that this came sequentially pretty close. And so I can see where the artificial elements came of it. But again, I would just sort of second what Ira was saying, was that within the context of that she was working within the new wave directors who were all, you know, she was the leading woman of that group. this is a very radical film within that context because all of the women are fully, I mean, they may be sort of a little cartoonish in a way because that's the type of movie that she is choosing to make, but still they're very developed and thought out, and there's a huge cast of varied women, and I mean, within the context of French film of the 60s and the 70s, this is like really like standing out. So again, thank you for choosing it.
Other questions? Over here, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that I really loved that their friendship was portrayed through letter writing, and that the letters were really brief, made it like this very simple sort of connection that they kept coming back to, which to me read is very true. It actually reminded me of a friendship that I had many years ago where I met the person, we were friends very briefly, the person moved to another country, and then over the years we developed this very, very deep friendship just through writing letters back and forth. It wasn't a romantic relationship, it was just a very deep bonded friendship that had a lot to do with art, a lot to do with politics, but it was all of our conversations happened through short letters, and so I really appreciated that format being brought into it because I haven't really seen that portrayed in film that much. So thank you.
I was really blown away by what she did with her marriage with Darius. Give me a kid and I'll keep one. I mean, that's radical. You know what I'm saying? It's not, oh, I'll come for 6 months and you come for 6 months. It's just, I have your own kid and I'll keep mine. What? I mean, it was just so fresh and also such a daring, like, I love you, but we can't live together in any way that's compatible. So this is a radical compromise. It's like a testament to our love. I just thought it was amazing. I was like, wow, that is an idealistic conception. You know?
Well, actually, I have to say the one part of the film that really bothers me is like,
really?
I mean, here she's a feminist, you know what I mean? And she's like doing this radical feminism thing, and she runs off with a dude, you know, to Iran. I'm like, are you kidding me? You know what I mean?
Right.
So like, there's like,
Did you not know?
you know, and I actually thought that was like the most idealistic, you know, because they played very nice, you know. I mean, ultimately he could just, you know, take the baby and be like, you know, later, you know, I don't know, whatever. Like, I mean, it's kind of like horrible, that scenario that she could have been in, but even still, I mean, I think, you know, what he says to her too, you never even tried to like learn any of my language or anything, you know, so, I mean, they were both exploiting each other in a particular way, but I just think like, I was wondering if through her getting involved with this Iranian man, like sort of like she was expressing kind of like her ambivalence toward feminism or something like that.
Yeah, and you know, the other thing that was so interesting was when she put on the veil, she was like, oh, I feel more naked with a veil. You know, there were a lot of unexpected things with that. I was like, oh. And there was also this romantic thing.
Yeah, it's too crazy.
You know, but it's like, it was just like, this is really interesting.
It was also pre-revolutionary. Wow. The revolution was probably in 78, 79, so it was just after.
But it was more liberal then.
Yes. Oh yeah, out of the shots.
Women's rights.
Right, but she's like, I'm gonna run away to Iran and like wear the veil. Come on.